Hi everybody. This presentation is intended to be a quick guide to academic writing in sociology and other disciplines. I have found in my experience with dealing with students that, there's just been some gaps in maybe your writing classes or your other experiences in writing where there are just some things you might not necessarily know about how to write. And specifically within the discipline of sociology, we have certain expectations as professional writers that maybe you might not necessarily have. So, just to make sure we're all on the same page at the beginning of our courses, I have decided to put together this presentation. So, in this presentation, we'll be talking about some very basic writing tips that anyone can use. We'll be talking about standard formatting, paragraphs, choosing reliable sources, citations, reference sheets, and very importantly, tone. You will also notice that where you find this presentation posted, you should also find a handout that will lay out many of these ideas, and I will also be posting a slide printout for the presentation itself. So let's talk about some very basic writing tips. When you write a paper for any course, you want to, before you turn it in, have a friend or family member look it over before you turn it in. This is especially important if the paper is important, if it's worth a lot of points, right? You don't want a dumb typo to be on there. You don't want to have something like where your name should be, it's say name here, right? You've spent a lot of time with that paper, so maybe you don't see that thing anymore. But if you let your sister look at it, if you let your friend look at it, they will be able to catch it quickly. Always punctuate and spell to the best of your ability. Use capital letters at the beginning of sentences. Try to spell correctly. Use commas uh, where you feel they're accurate and try to do that correctly, right? That's important. Always stick to standard formatting. Don't mess with the margins. Some students think that if they make their margins extra big, that professors won't notice. You're not fooling anybody. Any professor knows where the standard margins belong. Um, if you're having troubles with writing, you think your writing could be better, if you are doing consistent B plus work, and you want to get that A work, go to your writing center on campus. That's what the writing centers are for. Even good students can benefit to going to writing centers to make their already good writing great, right? And that's what you should do. One last thing is to pick a style and stick to it, and this applies to any course. Listen to your professor as far as what style they want you to write for. My classes are expected to use ASA style, which is the style of the American Sociological Association. Standard formatting. Um, I expect students in my courses to use either Times New Roman or Calibri fonts. No other font really is acceptable other than those two fonts. And throughout your entire paper, you're supposed to use the same font. Don't it? You might think it looks nice, but it doesn't. Don't make your title of your paper a different font than the rest of your paper. It just doesn't look good. And it needs to be 12-point font. Again, just like the margins, you aren't fooling anybody by making your paper 14-point font and thinking you have to write less. That's just it's I can see it in a second. Spacing. Papers are expected to be double spaced. Actually, students most often, when they mess this up, single space their papers, which is very hard for professors to read, quite frankly. It's hard because our eyes blur together after reading, 25 papers on the same subject. So please double space. And do not leave spaces between paragraphs. Now with that said, there are certain disciplines that want you to leave spaces between paragraphs, but it is not a good general practice unless you have been specifically told to do so. Let's talk about those paragraphs, though. Um, a lot of students don't break their ideas into paragraphs. And if you do break your ideas into paragraphs, that's great, and that's what you should be doing. But if you have more than 5 sentences, you should consider, should this be a smaller paragraph? And certainly, if you have a page or more of material, you need to break that down into paragraphs. Just remember this. One paragraph is one thought, right? It's one, so that's how it should be broken down. So, a 5-page paper is more than one absolute coherent thought, right? You're having a bunch of thoughts going on in there. So it needs to be more than one mega paragraph. Here's a classic essay format. So if you're wondering what should your paragraphs look like, here is what any writing instructor would tell you as far as what a classic format looks like. First, you introduce your topic. Your first sentence, your thesis statement, should be what is your paper going to be about. It can be said, tell them what you'll tell them, right? What is this paper going to be about? And then you use 3 to 5 sentences to tell me what the paper is going to be about. And you address each of your supporting points. So your second sentence should be about what your first supporting paragraph is going to be. Your third is what your second supporting paragraph is going to be. Your fourth is what your third supporting paragraph is going to be. And then in each of your supporting paragraphs, you write about those sentences you talked about in your introduction, right? And then finally, your hypothetical fifth paragraph will be your conclusion. This will be your tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, your final arguments about the thing. Now, given this essay format would probably give you about a 2-page paper, maybe about 500 words or so. If you have a longer paper, you put in more paragraphs, you put in more sentences, but this is a general classic guidelines. This is what a paper on the college level should be based on, right? In terms of cars, right? We think cars have 4 wheels, they have windows, they have a body, there's seats on the inside, right? Within that, there's a lot of variation in cars. Just like that, that's how essays go. Now let's talk about reliable sources. There are more reliable sources and there are bad sources. For academic writing on the college level, your most reliable sources are journal articles and books. And the reason why journal article and books are the best is because how they're processed. Academic journal articles, so the journal articles that are available to you in the library or through the library's website, have been peer reviewed. Before those stories can get in those academic journal articles, other scientists, other academics have to look those things over to make sure the material is good, right? That is a big deal. That makes academic journal articles the gold standard in terms of being a good source. Books are also a good source, though, because academic books have been reviewed extensively by the editors of those books, and maybe more than one editor of the books. So, and a lot of time goes into the books to make sure they're good material. Those processes make academic journal articles and books the best sources you can use for college papers. And some papers, they're the only sources you're allowed to use because we want you to be using good base material to show us that you understand the material. Now, sometimes in college papers, we allow you to use newspapers and magazines. And And this is sometimes a little bit of a gray area because some newspapers have very good reputations of being reliable sources, or magazines, or publications, or whatever they call themselves, right? But the editors are not academically focused. They're not focused on specific disciplines. They're focused on other elements, right? They might be focused on what is an exciting story, and that might be make it more interesting to read, but it makes it not as good academically. When determining if a newspaper or magazine source is good, you have to rely on the reputation of that source. And that is what makes it more reliable, not most reliable. Not reliable things, most web pages, most things you find on the internet, unfortunately, are not reliable and they should not be used in for academic papers. With that said, the material you get from your college or university's website, library website, that stuff, those academic articles you get through the library, they are good. Those are in that most reliable category. If you think something you find on the internet is a really great source, ask your professor. That is, there's good stuff on the internet, but a lot of it is just junk, and that's a big problem we're facing in our society right now. Not reliable, biased news sources, YouTube news channels. A lot of the news that we are fed in our society right now are intended to cater to you, cater to me, cater to our political wants and desires, right? And when news sources do that, they do not report objectively and they do not report reliably. So that's why that stuff isn't usable. It might sound great. It might sound exciting to us. It might sound perfect to us, but it's because it's tailored to get us excited about a topic, not necessarily to tell us the full truth. Now, with all of that, we have a different category of sources in encyclopedias, including Wikipedia. These are okay places to start learning about a topic, but they are not good sources for a college paper. Encyclopedias are considered common knowledge. This is considered stuff that everyone hypothetically knows. So, if you read an encyclopedia article on something, that's a good place to learn about the topic, but to write me a college level paper, you have to go beyond what is in the encyclopedia, right? So an encyclopedia is not an acceptable source for the vast majority of college papers. Now let's talk about citations. Whenever you write something that is not your original thought, you should use an in-text citation. And in general, it's a good idea to have 3 to 5 in-text citations per page. That's not an absolute guideline, but it's a good guideline. Always cite when you use a direct quote. When you say something like, Marx said in 1848, the proletariat should have nothing to lose but their chains, etc., etc., etc. When you use a direct quote, when you say Lincoln said 7 years ago, blah, 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 you use a citation. Where did you find that material? Anytime you use statistics, if you use a statistic that says, I'm making this up, a statistic that says 25% of new mothers find that their stress level has risen due to having to feed their baby every hour or something. Then you need a statistic. Where did you get that? Did you just pull it out of your head like I just pulled that out of my head? Well, don't do that, right? Tell me what book, what academic journal article you got those statistics out of. Now, uh, ASA citations look like this, right? Different styles have different citations. But for my classes, if your thing has one author, you would put the last name, that's my last name, comma, the year of publication. So if I wrote a book or a journal article in 2017, it would say Baker, comma, 2017. If I wrote an academic journal article with a writing partner, my friend Kayam Kidwai has been my writing partner in the past, then we have two authors. So if we publish something in 2017, it would be Baker and Kidwai, comma, 2017. But if I wrote with more authors, but I was the lead guy in that publication, it would say Baker et al. 2017. That's not as common. The most common thing you'll see is that one author, but that's what those other things look like. Let's talk about reference sheet. Again, different styles have different formats. A reference sheet is also known as a bibliography or a works cited. There are differences between those two things, but these things are often used as synonyms. If you have questions about what your professor means specifically, ask them. Always alphabetize your reference sheet, and it should be alphabetized based on the last name of the primary author. So Welch Kathleen would probably appear at the bottom of the list. Harawathe Donna would appear, where the H's go, right? Check out CiteThisForMe.com. They have a lot of tools there to help you put together a reference sheet that will look good, right? Now, with that said, check with your professor before you use that, because they might want you to put it together from scratch and by hand. But a lot of us professors don't really care if you use tools like Cite This For Me. And if your professor does allow it, then you should use that because it helps. So in ASA format, we want for a book, we want the last name, the first name, the year of publication, the name of the academic journal article, right here. We want the place of publication, Cambridge, Massachusetts, MIT Press. That is the publishing house. In a journal article, we want last name, first name, the name of the article, the name of the journal, the volume of the journal, and the page number in that journal. And that's the very basics. Now, briefly, let's talk about tone. And tone is really important because tone helps you get your ideas across. Sorry about that. Tone helps you get your ideas across. Don't swear in your academic journal in your papers, right? Don't do that. Don't use language that could be perceived as offensive, even if they aren't necessarily classical swear words. Jokes in your college papers are usually a bad idea because most of us are not trained humor writers, right? So don't do it. When you're talking about a controversial issues, remember that most issues have at least two perspectives surrounding them. So if you explore one point of view, at least explain the other point of view, right? So if you're writing a paper about abortion and you are a very pro-choice person, explain what the pro-life people have to say about that, right? You don't have to agree with it in your paper, but tell us what they are saying, right? That's how you make a good argument. In sociology specifically, we do talk about controversial issues, but don't let your research paper turn into a manifesto. The goal of a college paper is to show your professor you understand the material, right? It is not to convince your professor, right? It's to show your professor that you understand, right? Don't, and again, unless your professor tells you otherwise, unless this is part of the assignment, it's not a great idea to challenge accepted theory in college papers. This is what academic journal articles are for, right? It's not what Soc 101 papers are for, right? Stick to what the theory says. Or find a theory that says what you want it to say. Don't say that the most respected sociological mind of the 20th century are idiots and this is why, right? It's not a great idea. It's not a good way to show the professor that you understand the material, right? Okay, that is a good starter on how to write a paper. And if you do these things that I laid out in this presentation, you will do better than if you don't do these things. If you do these things and you mess up bad, you'll get a B. If you don't do these things and you mess up bad, you're going to get an F. So I hope this is a good starter for you, and good luck with your papers.